Second person singular. The dawn did not break. It merely bruised the sky. Gray light, heavy and suffocating, pressed against the singular window of the studio apartment, filtering through grime that had accumulated over years of neglect. Arthur woke with the taste of copper in his mouth and a rhythmic pounding behind his eyes, as if a second, smaller heart were beating inside his skull. He sat up, the thin sheets peeling away from his sweat-slicked skin with a sound like tearing parchment. He blinked, trying to clear the fog of a sleep that felt less like rest and more like a coma. There was a piece of paper stuck to the back of his hand. It was a small, yellow square, the adhesive weak and drying. Arthur peeled it off, bringing it close to his face in the dim light. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, scrawled in black ink that had bled through to the other side. "You have a headache. Drink the water on the nightstand." Arthur stared at the note. He did have a headache, a terrible one. He looked to the nightstand. A glass of water sat there, bubbles clinging to the inside of the rim, looking stale but inviting. He hadn't put it there. He lived alone. He remembered locking the door. He remembered the chain sliding into place. "Hello?" His voice cracked, dry and unused. The apartment swallowed the sound. He drank the water. It was lukewarm and tasted faintly of dust, but it soothed the dryness in his throat. He swung his legs out of bed, his bare feet touching the cold hardwood floor. Another note was stuck to the floorboards, right where his left foot landed. "You are cold. Put on the gray sweater." Arthur recoiled, pulling his foot back. The apartment was freezing. The radiator hissed in the corner, a serpentine sound that offered no heat. He looked at the chair in the corner. His gray sweater, the heavy wool one, was draped over the back, arms hanging limp like a dead man's. Fear, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the base of his neck. He wasn't suffering from amnesia. He knew who he was. He knew it was the 14th of November. He knew he had gone to sleep alone. He stood up, shivering violently, and grabbed the sweater. As he pulled it over his head, the wool scratching his ears, he heard a sound from the kitchenette. A soft, wet slap, like a piece of meat hitting the counter. Arthur froze, his head half buried in the sweater. He pulled it down quickly, his eyes darting to the kitchenette. It was empty. The shadows stretched long and thin across the linoleum, distorting the shapes of the toaster and the kettle into grotesque silhouettes. He walked slowly toward the noise, his heart hammering against his ribs. On the counter, stuck to the handle of the refrigerator, was a third note. "You are hungry. Do not open the fridge. Eat the toast." Arthur stared at the fridge. It hummed aggressively, a low, mechanical growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor. He reached out a trembling hand toward the handle. Why shouldn't he open it? It was his fridge, his food. "Do not open the fridge." The warning was specific. He hesitated. The air around the appliance felt colder than the rest of the room, radiating a chill that numbed his fingertips. He pulled his hand back on the counter. A single slice of toast sat on a paper towel. It was burnt black at the edges, stone cold. He ate it. He ate it because the fear of disobeying the yellow square was suddenly, inexplicably, stronger than his hunger. The burnt crust scraped the roof of his mouth. The days began to blur. Time became a fluid, unreliable concept, measured not by the ticking clock on the wall, which had stopped at 3 in the afternoon years ago, but by the accumulation of yellow paper. On the 17th of November, Arthur found a note taped to the bathroom mirror. "You look tired. Do not look at your reflection." He stood before the sink, the porcelain stained with rust rings. The note was positioned perfectly at eye level, blocking his own face. He felt the urge to peel it away, to check his eyes, to see if the dark circles he felt dragging down his cheeks were real. He reached for the corner of the paper. Scritch, scratch. The sound came from inside the wall, behind the mirror. It sounded like fingernails digging into drywall. Rapid, frantic scratching. Arthur jumped back, colliding with the shower curtain. The scratching stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with a threat he couldn't name. He didn't peel the note. He washed his face, splashing water over his skin, keeping his eyes squeezed shut, terrified that if he opened them, he would see something standing behind him in the sliver of mirror exposed around the paper. When he reached for the towel, he felt the familiar texture of paper. A note pinned to the towel rack. You missed a spot. He screamed, scrubbing his face violently with the towel until his skin was raw and red. By the 22nd of November, the apartment was a gallery of commands. They were everywhere. On the television screen, you don't want to watch this. Inside his shoes, check for spiders. On the ceiling above his bed, sleep on your side. Arthur moved through his home like a marionette, his strings pulled by the ink. He had tried to leave once. On the 19th, he had marched to the front door, determined to break the cycle. A note was pasted over the peephole. You made a mistake. Don't go outside. He had gripped the doorknob. It was scorching hot. He hissed in pain, pulling his hand away, blistering red skin forming on his palm. Smoke curled from the metal. He had backed away, sobbing, and retreated to the center of the room. The protagonist, the innocent, was being eroded. In his place was a vessel of pure anxiety. He began to anticipate the notes before he found them. He started whispering to the empty room, begging the author to stop. "Who are you?" he whispered to the darkness on the evening of the 25th. "What do you want?" He turned on the lamp. A note was stuck to the lampshade. "You are asking the wrong questions." That night, the scares became physical. Arthur lay in bed, the duvet pulled up to his chin. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to detach themselves from the walls. He watched, paralyzed, as a pool of darkness near the closet elongated, stretching upward. It wasn't a trick of the light. The shadow-possessed mass. It blocked the faint glow of the street lamps outside. He squeezed his eyes shut. If I don't see it, it's not there. Something heavy sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped. The springs groaned under a weight that felt dense and concentrated. Arthur stopped breathing. He could feel the pressure of a presence, a radiating coldness that smelled of old ink and ozone. He waited for a hand to touch him. He waited for a voice. Instead, he heard the soft, wet sound of a tongue licking paper, then the slide of adhesive against wood. The weight lifted. The mattress sprang back. Arthur lay there until dawn, his bladder aching, his eyes burning. When the gray light finally returned, he sat up. There was a note on his pillow, right next to his head. You slept well. He hadn't slept at all. The realization arrived on the 2nd of December. Arthur was sitting on the floor, surrounded by piles of crumpled yellow paper. He was trying to organize them, to find a pattern, a code, anything that would explain the torment. Don't go outside. Don't look in the mirror. Don't answer the phone. The phone had rung only once, a shrill, deafening sound that made his ears bleed. Cut your nails. Sit in the chair. He looked at his hands. His fingernails were bitten down to the quick, bloody and ragged. He hadn't cut them. He had gnawed them off in a frenzy he couldn't quite remember. He picked up a fresh note he had found on the kitchen table that morning. You are angry. Throw the glass. Arthur frowned. He wasn't angry. He was terrified. He was exhausted, but he wasn't angry. He looked at the glass of water in his hand. You are angry. Throw the glass. I don't want to, he whispered. A sudden, sharp pain flared in his right shoulder, a stinging sensation like a whip crack. He yelped, his arm jerking involuntarily. The glass flew from his hand, shattering against the far wall. Shards rained down on the hardwood. Arthur grasped his shoulder, massaging the phantom pain. He looked at the shattered glass. He looked at the note. You are angry. He stood up, his breath hitching. He walked over to the wall where the glass had smashed. There, hidden behind where a picture frame used to hang, was another note. The glass had knocked the frame down days ago. You feel better now. He didn't. He felt sick. But then he saw it. The sequence. He went back to the pile. He found the note from the first day. You have a headache. He remembered waking up. He hadn't felt the headache until he read the note. The pain had bloomed after the comprehension. He found the note from the mirror. You look tired. He hadn't felt the exhaustion until the words entered his mind. He found the note from the door. You made a mistake. He hadn't burned his hand until he read the warning. Arthur backed away from the pile of yellow squares as if they were radioactive. They weren't warnings. They weren't observations. They were scripts. The author wasn't watching him live his life. The author was writing it. The notes were stage directions. The reason the doorknob was hot was because the note said it was a mistake to leave. The reason he was cold was because the note told him he was... No, Arthur whispered. No, that's impossible. A piece of paper fluttered down from the ceiling fan. It spiraled slowly, landing softly on the floor between his feet. You understand. Now you are afraid. Terror, absolute and chemical, flooded his veins. It wasn't natural fear. It was an injection. His heart rate spiked to dangerous levels instantly. His vision tunneled. He gasped for air, clutching his chest. The note had commanded him to be afraid, and his body had obeyed without his consent. He scrambled backward, crab-walking away from the paper, his heels scraping against the wood. He hit the wall. "Stop it!" he screamed. "Stop writing!" The apartment was silent. Then a low rumble began. The floorboards vibrated. The walls seemed to contract, the room shrinking, the dimensions tightening around him like a closing fist. From the hallway, the dark corridor leading to the bathroom, a sound emerged. The sound of a pen scratching against paper, loud, amplified, like a chisel on stone. Scritch, scratch, scritch. Arthur covered his ears. I am not listening. I am not reading. He squeezed his eyes shut. If he didn't read them, they couldn't control him. That was the rule. The input mechanism was his vision. He kept his eyes shut tight. He would navigate by touch. He would find the door, blindly turn the knob, and leave. If he didn't read, "Don't go outside," the door wouldn't be hot. The reality wouldn't shift. He crawled forward, eyes clamped shut. He felt the cold floor. He felt the dust. Something brushed against his face. Paper. Hanging from invisible threads, he swatted them away. Scritch, scratch. The sound was getting louder. It was coming from the center of the room now. Arthur stood up, swaying in the darkness of his own making. He stumbled toward where he knew the door was. He reached out, his hands grasping for the wood. His fingers touched something sticky. Paper. A wall of paper. He felt around frantically. The door was gone. The entire surface was covered in layers of post-it notes. He clawed at them, ripping them down, hoping to find the wood beneath. He peeled away layer after layer. There was no wood, only more paper. Dense, compacted layers of yellow pulp. He couldn't help it. The sensation of being buried alive was too strong. He opened his eyes. He wasn't at the door. He was standing in front of a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its head brushing the ceiling. It was wrapped entirely in yellow paper, like a crude mummy. Where a face should be, there was only a smooth, blank surface. In its hand, a long, multi-jointed limb composed of rolled parchment, it held a black marker. Arthur tried to scream, but his throat seized. The figure reached out and slapped a note onto Arthur's forehead. Arthur's eyes crossed to read it. The ink was wet. You cannot breathe. His lungs turned to stone. His diaphragm locked. He clawed at his throat, his mouth opening and closing in a silent gasp. He fell to his knees, staring up at the paper golem. The figure stood motionless, the marker poised for the next line. Arthur's vision began to spot with black. He needed oxygen. He needed the author to write him a breath. He reached out a hand, pleading, his fingers trembling toward the entity. The figure tilted its head. It moved the marker to a pad of paper held in its other hand. It wrote slowly, deliberately, the screech of the marker tearing through the silence of the dying room. It peeled the note off and, let it drift down. Arthur watched it fall. He was on his side now, the world turning gray, then black. The note landed inches from his nose. You realize you are a character? You realize you have served your purpose? The edges of the room began to dissolve. The walls turned into ink and ran down into the darkness. The floor melted. Arthur felt his own body losing cohesion, his skin turning to pulp, his blood turning to ink. He wasn't a man. He never had been. He was a draft, and he was being crumpled up. The last thing he saw, before the darkness became total, was the figure writing one final note. It placed it on the void where Arthur's chest used to be. The end.